Afternoon, members.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair.
Hi. We are with the Department of Education this afternoon, and the department will present to us the COVID-19 survey report for 2020. My name is Lorraine Botha. I'm the chairperson for the standing committee. Members, I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourselves for the record.
Good afternoon, fellow Christians.
Good afternoon, Khalid Sayed.
Good afternoon, everyone, and Chairperson Regan Allen.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Ricardo Mackenzie, just standing in for Member Bosman.
Thank you very much. Is that all our members? Thank you, Member Mackenzie, for standing in for Member Bosman. I have received a notice from him, but I'm also glad that you are here because we are going to, part of the agenda is to adopt that Genadendal report. So I am glad that you are here. Member Sayed, I am noting your hand. Is that for an apology?
Yes, Chair. An apology on behalf of Member Kama. He's got a bereavement in his family, so he's unable to make it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that notice, Member Sayed. We wish Member Kama and his family all the best as they are going through this bereavement. Thank you, Member Sayed. I'm going to ask then the department, and I think it's just Mr. Ian De Vega who is joining us today. Please, sir, if you can introduce yourself just for the record.
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, members. My name is Ian De Vega. I'm the Chief Director for Business Intelligence Management within Western Cape Education Department.
Thank you very much. And then we are assisted by our very capable procedural officers, who is Ms. Wasima Hassan Musa, as well as Ms. Mary Ann Burgess, and then also our IT specialist, Mr. Siraj Hassam. Thank you very much for assisting us this afternoon in regard to getting the standing committee meeting going. Thanks for the assistance. And then I want to say to everybody else who is on the platform, who has joined the platform, please be welcomed as you are joining us today. Members, in regards to the standing committee meeting, I have introduced to you the subject matter for this afternoon. I want to ask all of you to please use the chat function to raise points of order. Use the raise your hand function if you are going to pose a question or you want to give input. And then I also want to ask you to keep all your videos off and then only switch on your microphone and your video when you are going to pose a question or give some input. But if the connection on your side is a bit dodgy, I would advise for you to keep your video screens off. And I also then want to ensure, and I'll ensure on my side also, that after you have spoken, that you have switched your mic back to mute. And when you start talking, please switch on your mic. Members, with that said, I'm going to give over to Mr. Ian De Vega, who is going to do the presentation. And thereafter, I will handle a round of questions. I'm saying a round, but if you have questions, we'll exhaust your questions. And then we will say goodbye to Mr. De Vega, and then we will do our in-house administrative duties in regard to the standing committee meeting. With that said, Mr. De Vega, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Sure. Chair, can you just indicate if you can see the presentation, please?
We can, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity for presenting our COVID survey outcomes at the standing committee. Just in terms of an overview, I'll be giving the context, which is largely the problem statement, purpose of the survey, how we phrased our research questions, the methodology used, as well as the sample size, high-level observations, and then recommendations in terms of what the recommendations were to WCED based on the outcomes of the survey. So the context, or as I would call it, the problem statement, is there was a national lockdown that changed the educational landscape within the country, and due to that, all schools were then closed with a phased and controlled reopening of the education sector. And during this time, the learners, parents, and educators were subjected to a lot of expectation without prior preparation or warning. And this survey, therefore, examines the experience during the period of lockdown and the phased reopening of the education sector. So the purpose of the survey was to get a balanced view on what had happened in the schools within the Western Cape between the periods March 2020 and November 2020. And this was to understand the impact of the pandemic on teaching, learning, and parenting. Also to examine the nature and the consequences of the disruption, and to determine the creativity forced on parents, educators, and learners during this time. So the research questions were: how did teaching and learning happen during the hard lockdown and the period after the hard lockdown? This needs to be understood within the context of how much progress learners were able to make in the current year. How did learners, educators, and parents cope emotionally and physically? How did the school's leadership navigate the school through the period of disruption in a way that everybody felt supported? And how were schools able to retain a sense of community through the period of disruption? So the method we use in the targeted cohort, basically we used a Microsoft Forms platform. So the study was largely technology driven, and therefore you required a smart device as well as an email account and connectivity to participate in the survey. We targeted learners from grades 7 to 12, their parents, and all educators. So the link was sent to all the schools, and we then requested the principal to send the link to all educators as well as to their parents. And if the parents consented, for the parents to share the link with the learners to participate. The survey link was active for 1 week only. So the major limitation in this approach was access to smart device and data or some form of connectivity. The targeted cohort, as highlighted in the table below, shows that the response rate was very low. And the reason for the low response rates are not immediately clear and would require further investigation. We felt that the data is nonetheless useful in providing insights into the views of the participants. So as you can see, overall, there have been close to 2% response rate. The highest being the parents, even though it's only a 2.4% response rate from parents, and teachers is close to 7%, and learners roughly 1.3% response rate. And you can see the actual distribution of the learner, parent, educator ratio in terms of the graphics below. So some high-level observations. So, the areas of strength for WCED was that learning continued. So the positive responses from participants echo the principle that during the lockdown, schools may be closed, but learning did not stop. And, so given that statement, the issue is that there's still, this issue still requires some attention. Depends on the social standing of the respondents. So the 85% of the respondents were learners from fee charging school, and roughly 80% of those were from quintile 5 schools, and 74% of the educators were from fee paying or fee charging schools as well. So therefore, there's a diversity or skewed diversity profile of the learners and educators that participated, and subsequently the parents. Despite investments in e-learning, the digital divide is still a challenge. And this is well documented in the media and literature, and it came through very strong in the actual survey itself. In terms of coping emotionally and physically, in a time of crisis, changing instruction confused most of the participants, and parents felt that they weren't part of the decision making in time of the crisis. And one of the recommendations was that to WCED that we must find innovative ways of delivering psychosocial support to the learners, parents, as well as the staff in time of crisis. In terms of the leadership, it's clear, from the study that the role of the educator in ensuring stability of the delivery of education is crucial. And their views on leadership guidance provides an indication of what was happening at school. So most of the questions that we posed on leadership guidance were directed at educators. And they stated that this was an area of strength where clear leadership of most principles were recognized by educators in terms of their response to COVID-19, clarity in communication, clarity of expectation of individual work as well. In terms of retaining a sense of community during the period of disruption, the lockdown experience created opportunities for team building, for collaboration. And, the indicative view was that the lockdown had the potential to alienate educators from each other, but the feedback and responses actually showed the opposite. In terms of the key observations that stood out, basically participants perceived schools to be safe. Schools were reported to be following the COVID-19 guidelines, and participants expressed the view that the lockdown experience has changed the teaching and learning context forever. And once again, this is also well documented in literature as well. In terms of the recommendations, the key recommendation to WCED was to design monitoring systems to ensure that the school continues to be viewed as a safe space, and that they are still continuing to follow the COVID-19 guidelines. We also encourage WCED to design a system for monitoring access to textbooks for each learner, given the fact that in times of no contact to teaching, that learners at least have a means of continuing education. Also, to capitalize on our e-investment. So WCED should ensure improved access to online resources, whether through the school computer labs or smart devices. Time for in-person schooling will be reduced, with social distancing in schools likely to continue beyond the period of population immunity or herd immunity, and ensure that electronic solutions are used in a way that reduces educator workload. Recommendations, and these are addressing our challenges. We need to address the digital divide by ensuring that school connectivity works all the time, ensure smart devices and computer labs at schools are working and are being used. In terms of psychosocial support in times of crisis, strengthen the collaboration with the Department of Health and Social Development in providing professional support services as needed by both learners and educators, and generate electronic information packages for distribution via social media covering various coping strategies for educators on the one stream and then for learners on the other stream as well. The other challenges is to clarify the role of the SGB in time of crisis, and as the majority felt that they were excluded from decision making. And the graphic basically displays that. And then educator workload, use of technology in ways that reduce educator workload, as well as standardized electronic assessments going forward. So some of the key takeaway points in summary is to keep schools safe by monitoring and promoting what is working, to promote collaboration within and between schools, and then capitalize on the e-learning and to target quintile 1 to 3 schools. In the time of crisis, ensure the following: that there are systems in place for SGB consultation and that there are systems that work in providing psychosocial support. Thank you very much, Chair. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Vega, for that presentation. Members, I have noticed that Mr. Lewis is in the meeting. Mr. Lewis, am I correct? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm just sitting in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lewis, for joining us. Members, I'm going to allow for the first round of questions. I note Member Christians and Member Sayed thereafter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just, Chair, just a question on, and I know a lot was mentioned about to addressing the digital divide, especially in the quintile 1 to 3 category. The question is, there was a lot of money spent when it comes to the rollout of the fiber systems and rollout to our schools, the optic fiber rollout to our schools. Did that not assist the schools? Because the problem now is, I know in the COVID period, schools were closed, but now with learners can access the Wi-Fi at schools, did that not help when it comes to the quintile 1 to 3? And the question is, I know there were still outstanding rollouts to quintile 1 to 3 schools. Just maybe that question is, how far is that rollout to make sure that all of our schools have the Wi-Fi, especially in 1 to 3? And then just the second question, Chairperson, is the emotional, the emotional support, the psychological, social support. Parents felt that they were not included. So what is the department going to do differently to make sure that parents are included by decision making? And this is the last question, the SGBs. What is the decision with SGBs to feel that they're also included in the time of crisis? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Christians. Member Allen, I note you. Member Sayed.
Thank you very much, Chair, and let me welcome the presentation and the survey. My first one, before getting into the key observations, is I just wanted to get a sense as to which schools were surveyed, how many schools were surveyed. In that context, also, if we could get a sense, was there a thought of also having, because I know ourselves as a committee last year, and I must commend the chair for that. Last year, when we went to schools to get a sense as to how they are complying with COVID protocols, how they're dealing with the issues, we didn't tell the schools beforehand. Our visits were basically unannounced. Have you looked at the possibility at that time, and maybe even going forward now for the next survey, because now we've entered the third wave, so I'm sure you're going to do a survey on how things are going now. Have you looked at the possibility of a survey which is basically unannounced, because that may also churn out some other kind of observations? I just wanted to get a sense of that. And when do you think, as a committee or the legislature, will probably be able to get the full report? I just wanted to get a sense of that. Then, in terms of some of the observations, I've been largely covered by member Christians. But so in terms of the connectivity, I think it's important that we get a response on that, the Wi-Fi rollout. But also, what I want to add to member Christians' concern is, have there been discussions around possibly also empowering learners who don't have connectivity at home to basically have some kind of resource to ensure that they can also, basically do online learning, they can respond to such surveys from home. So going beyond the Wi-Fi rollout, which is important. Then also from member Christians' questions around the parental involvement and parents feeling excluded. And you did mention the issue of school governing body training. Now, I know even beyond, I think this is symptomatic. I don't think it's a unique issue purely to the COVID response and that you need to beat yourself up too much about it, because I think beyond this issue, there is an issue around SGBs and them knowing what their roles are and what their roles are not. So I think, have you looked at ways of probably factoring this issue in to the SGB training, and how would you best factor this issue in to the SGB training? I mean, have you looked at any ways that you can that you can factor it into the SGB training? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Allen. Member Christians, if you're not posing another question, can you lower your hand, please?
Thank you so much, Chairperson. I am largely covered, but I just wanted to latch on to what Member Christians also asked in terms of, I know that there has been a low reach in terms of those that were actually surveyed, but have we considered, did the Education Department consider using USSD, or even in the near future, if they will potentially do potential focus groups, which will give us a more on the ground and a more realistic feeling of exactly how learners are feeling and coping. I just wanted to get that information as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to know, I also have a few questions, and I'm latching on to both, to all the members that asked before me. And I just want to check with you, Mr. Tavega, are you doing a follow-up survey in regard to this one that has been done? And you said that parents felt that they were not part of decision making. Was this due to the school not directly communicating to them, or was it because of the SGB not directly communicating to them? And then in regard to the key recommendations that you highlighted, can you speak to what the status of that is now, please? And then in regard to the digital divide that you also have mentioned, can you tell us how many schools do we have where adequate computer labs and smart devices are still absent? And then in regard to the psychological support, I just want to know, in regard to the survey and the sample that you have used, what was rural WCED representation versus the metro representation? If you can speak to that as well. And that is our first round of questions to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, members, for the questions. So in terms of the first question from member Christians regarding the broadband rollout, which he referred to as the fiber rollout, to date, out of the 1,489 schools, we've basically implemented 1,297 schools with broadband capability. And of those, close to 1,000 has a broadband speed of over 100 meg. At these schools as well, we've implemented what is known as public Wi-Fi, so where the public can access the Wi-Fi in close proximity to the school as well. So we roughly have about between 230 and 240 schools not connected with broadband. But for those schools, we provide a stipend for them to get a contract with their local service provider, so that they also have some level of broadband connectivity to access systems like CMS, your people management practice service, we call it PMPS, to report on staff attendance and the like, as well as other solutions that we have implemented in terms of the screening app and so forth. So these have been implemented. In terms of the parent inclusion in decision making, or SGB in time of crisis, I'm not an authority to be able to report on progress made in this regard, but what I was merely doing was responding to the feedback that we received from the research done by the Business Intelligence Management Unit. And, so in terms of, following up with regards to the parental inclusion, whether it was the school or the SGB not communicating, as Member Botha has kind of extended the question beyond that, I wouldn't be able to provide a response, but I'm not sure if Mr. Lewis will be able to assist in that regard. Then going on to Member Said's questions in terms of how many schools were surveyed. Roughly 367 schools were surveyed. So it was only the grade 7 to 12 learners, their parents, and then all educators. So, but if you're looking at, in terms of learner and parents, about 367 schools. In terms of the educators, it was all educators were basically surveyed. And then I think it's a very good suggestion to have an unannounced survey. I obviously have to engage EXCO on this to get their support in doing so. Getting access to the full report, once again, I'm sure that's possible, but I need to also then get the EXCO approval for that. Then in terms of empowering learners who do not have connectivity at home, there's been several attempts by the department to engage the service providers like MTN and Vodacom to look at low-cost data for that provisioning, because you were right to say that within the hard lockdown, schools couldn't even be accessed for the actual Wi-Fi connectivity, even though it was utilized and on at the time, because to get the public Wi-Fi or the free Wi-Fi, you technically have to be in proximity to the school itself, which, you know, in the time, the only solutions that we thought were possible were to engage the local service providers like MTN and Vodacom. Unfortunately, the price bracket that they were quoting was quite expensive, and we tried to, you know, facilitate further engagements, but that wasn't possible going forward. But in terms of connectivity, we're ensuring that connectivity is up at these schools, that the broadband is then expanded to 100 meg, and in some cases 1 gig, if depending on the size of the school. And we're also looking at other methods of getting broadband rollout to the remainder schools, even if it's not via the broadband program, but other means. And we are engaging RSA Web to determine ways of doing that as well. And then I think the others were more suggestions in terms of including looking at ways to factor into the SGB training, and then using other methodologies to do the survey itself. So focus groups will be considered, and then a follow-up survey will also be considered. I think, Chair, oh yeah, and then the status of the recommendations. I don't have a formal report on the status, but could potentially provide that, as well as the rural and metro split in terms of representation, as well as the smart lab absence in schools. I can also provide that at a later stage to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Vega. I just want to say to Member Said, we have received the report this morning on the survey. So the report is in your inbox.
Thank you, Chair. I'm seeing it now. I was in back-to-back meetings, so I have.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine. I want to check with Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, is there anything that you would want to add, sir?
Yeah, I will be speculating now, which could be closer to 80% the truth. The fact that parents perhaps raised the issue that they were not involved could be the result of a few things. We must remember that during the hard lockdown, over and above that, schools were closed for that period. After schools resumed 1st of June last year, there was actually a ban on any person wanting to enter the school. So those no parent could visit the school physically. And it was the same for the SGB. The SGB couldn't attend, they couldn't meet as an SGB, and they had to find other ways and means to meet, of which later Teams and other forms of virtual communication was activated at certain schools. It also depends on your members of the school governing body and their accessibility towards these social media platforms. There were three activities I would say that during that time were delayed in terms of making progress. The one was the whole issue of recruitment and selection. They were posts advertised, and because governing bodies are critical in dealing with advertised posts, that process almost came to a halt. It almost came to a halt and could only resume in bits and pieces, you know, after the levels were lowered. The second one and was the finances of the school, because the school governing body is also critical in the financial management of the school. That was delayed, and it could be that it was then perhaps only those people involved in the finance committee that were consulted on any form of finances or invoices that had to be paid. And then there's a third area, I would say, and is the school safety committee. Now, the school safety committee, in essence, is a subcommittee of the school governing body. So it's either the chair or the secretary of the school governing body that must chair that body. Now, again, because of the fact that people couldn't meet, we rely heavily on virtual meetings, and in some communities that was basically impossible. So those could be the reasons why parents felt that they were not part of the process. In terms of normal communication, I can confirm that most of our schools relied on WhatsApp communication, and teachers use that to liaise with their learners, but also with parents. And the school itself made use of WhatsApp communication or normal SMS communication. That is what I can say around that. There was an issue raised about psychosocial support. Now, psychosocial support in the first place is intended for learners mostly. Although teachers are also making use of that service, the department has got specialized services for teachers to utilize, which teachers can utilize free of charge. But I can say, and there is some information available, that during the hard lockdown and after schools opened and we had tragic cases of teachers losing their lives, there is evidence that about our psychosocial support team in the province is about 160 members strong. That is psychologists, social workers, and therapists, and all of them, about 160 spread across the province. They also supported parents during that time, and we do have evidence and numbers to that effect. I think we shared it at one stage last year. And then the last thing, Chair and members, is that there is evidence that even our districts on their own are doing something good regarding learners who do not have data and so on. I'm aware that in Metro East Education District, they have concluded an agreement with one of the providers. It's either MTN or Vodacom. And they have given all the grade 12 learners in that district an amount of data every month so that those learners can access, the important material that's on the WCED website. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Members, I'll take a next round of questions. Member Said.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to welcome the responses. Mr. Lewis, I want to welcome the fact that there's data provided to learners in the Metro East. I just wanted to get a sense, I didn't hear very properly. Is it for which grades is that data provided? And then also, if Mr. Lewis has with him, if he doesn't, we can always get the info later, but just a sense of the amount of data that's provided per learner. I think that will be good to know. Then finally, just as the way forward, you know, we are in the third wave now, third wave of infections. Schools will be closing in the next few weeks for the holidays. They will then return. Can I just get a sense as to how is the department seeking maybe a few practical ways? And I know you've given your recommendations, but ways in which the department will utilize the lessons from this particular survey in handling some of the immediate challenges of the third wave that's going to be coming to our schools. I mean, and we're already seeing it. Many schools are now forced to close. There are all of these type of issues. And maybe just talk a bit. I know we were given an update last week. Is there further update on the approach regarding the ability to do distancing whilst there's full capacity? At our classes, at our classrooms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And that questions you have now posed to Mr. Lewis and not to Mr. De Vega.
Yes, those questions are for Mr. Lewis. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Side, Mr. De Vega, you can assist where you can. The initiative in East is mainly focused on the grade 12 learners, and I can find out from the head curriculum, and I will raise that information to the committee on the amount of data available and whether it is given per day or per month. I'm not sure, but I can get more information and then relay it to you. I think I'm not sure, Mr. De Vega, you must help me now whether this report and the information was perhaps presented at the Topco where the other managers sit, because I think if not, then I think that should be the next step in the department, so that as broad men or as top management we can sit around and see how we can use the same information to improve as we approach the third wave. That was their third question, member side.
Mr. Lewis, not necessarily a third, but it was linked to that one regarding the third wave. I wanted to just get an update from last week on what's being done to ensure that the physical distancing will be maintained while classes operate at full capacity.
Yeah, chair and members, to date, there's actually no movement in terms of the physical distancing. Remember, I also mentioned that there is discussion at the national level with the Department of Health whether education as a sector could be allowed to scrap that 1 meter physical distancing, but that discussion is still ongoing. Now, if that doesn't happen, unfortunately, in most of our schools, to maintain that 1 meter physical distancing will mean that learners in your classes will have to rotate. And it is in those cases that our branch curriculum, and it's unfortunate that they are not part of here. They are the guys who are developing material, not only online material, but also LTSM packages on printed material to schools, so that schools can share it with the learners, so that when the learners are at home, that they can continue with learning, and that the disruption is minimized as far as possible. So the situation around having more schools, primary schools open on the 26th, that situation is still unchanged. As a report
did not respond to, we will send that in writing to the department for a written response then.
Noted, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Lewis, any closing remarks from your side, sir?
Chair and members, thank you for having invited us and receiving us, and for the engagement in the interest of education, so that that's what I believe as a collective, whether we are sitting in the department or the important roles that you are fulfilling as members of the standing committee, how we can jointly and collectively take ownership to see how we can advance education within our communities, especially in our disadvantaged communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Goodbye to you.
Bye,
Chair.
Chair.
Goodbye,
Bye,
members.
members.
Members, we have now come to that part of our meeting where we do our administrative tasks. I will ask Wasima if we, members, firstly, any recommendations from your side apart from the written responses that we will request? Any further recommendations? None? Wasima? Can member Said, I see that you switched on your mic even though your hand was not raised. I take it that you want to give some input?
Chair, no, I just wanted to say that those recommendations that we made in the meeting and that they have also accepted, I think those we can obviously record as well. That I'm not, yeah, so that's, and I think there were a few in that regard, and I'm sure Wasima has noted those.
Okay, thank you. Member Allen, I note you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I am covered by Member Syed. I'm not sure how to phrase it, but in terms of the department indicating in our meeting that some of our proposals will be considered if they are then able to keep us updated in that regard, to say that it has been considered, they are going to do it, or they're not going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we should also then put that in writing and then also ask in that phrase for the department to keep us abreast of how they have decided to implement that. Wasima, can I just ask you to read back in terms of the recommendations?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I've captured, and what I haven't captured, I'll go over the recordings. Member Said has asked for how many schools and which areas they were in. They answered the number of schools, but did not provide the schools' names. Do you still want that? And then also the one thing that Member Allen was referring to was look at an unannounced survey, and if this would be possible, they said that they would take this to TopCo to have it, to see whether they can do it in that regard. I've also have the data that was given to grades, the data per learner and per day or per month to Metro East, how many was given to them to provide that, as Mr. Lewis was unable to provide that information. There's another one from member Water on how many schools do not have the fiber in it or PCs. Am I missing anything? And what I'm not missing, I can also check on the audio of it.
Okay, we have covered Member Allen.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. If we are able to get an update based on the department considering the use of USSD technology, which is much cheaper and that can be used on any normal cell phone, and as well as on the potential for future focus groups in order to get a deeper understanding of the on what the survey actually wanted to get back from learners and parents. Thank you.
Got that, Member Allen? Anything else?
Thank you very much, Wasima. I just think that when the department gives us the list of schools, members, I would want to recommend then that we again start a journey of unannounced visits to of these schools. Would you support me in that?
Fully supported, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that also becomes then another recommendation, Wasima.
Sure, Chair, I've captured.
Okay, now members, on our notice, we do not have the Genadendal report, but you have received the Genadendal report together with the notice and agenda for this meeting. Now, I want to know, we have received this report previously already, and I want us to adopt this report today because it has been a long time coming now. I'm also very cognizant of the fact that in regard to this visit, it was a joint visit by Education and the Standing Committee on the Premier, and member Ricardo Mackenzie was chairing this meeting. However, there are members in this meeting now today who embarked on this visit who could propose for us to adopt this report. Now, I'm taking it that all members have gone through this report, but I will ask Wasima, she has flighted it. I will ask her to take us through the report, and then if we can adopt this report now in this session. Wasima, page 1. There are those members that you were on the visit. Okay, continue. Wasima, just go back to the attendees. Okay, all right. We have member Alan here, and we have member Sayed here, who was on the visit. I'm not sure whether member Brinkhuis is in this meeting today. Okay. Continue.
Yes, Chair, I am, yeah.
Are you? Okay, thank you, member Brinkhuis. You were quiet today.
Yes, very quiet.
Okay, continue. That is the overview, why we went there, the key aspects pertaining to our visit there. Okay. There was a presentation to us on the Emile Wider School, secondary school. And the key aspects of that presentation came out, and it is highlighted here. Thanks, Wasima. Continue. And then in the presentation, they also spoke to the challenges in regard to the schools within the district, the Overberg district. And there was a question and answer session from all members on the day. Members, if this is a true reflection on our visit to Genadendal and the presentation that we have received, I shall now ask Member Allen, I note you. I will now ask for this draft report to be adopted. Member Allen.
Chairperson, firstly, thank you so much for circulating the report. I have perused it, and I'm more than happy to move that we adopt.
Thank you very much. Member Sayed.
Chair, thank you very much. I've also perused it, and I want to second the adoption of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that report has now been adopted. Thank you. Members, that brings us to the end of our standing committee twice in a row. We have gone through this meeting within an hour. Thank you very much for your availability to be in the standing committee meeting today. And we shall see each other in the next meeting, which is only when we get back from the constituency period, because we start constituency period on Monday. However, please peruse the parliamentary program. We have the workshop that we are conducting together with the Standing Committee on Social Development. And then also, and I want to say to you, go well, and please, please, please keep safe. Keep your social distance. Please keep to the COVID protocols. Go well. Thank you. Wasima, thank you very much for the logistics around our meeting, and thank you for Siraj as well. Go well. Bye-bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.